one of the things that I love about my job as an HR professional is that beautiful bridge between how we see the organization evolving and who we need to be part of us on that journey. And so my role a lot of times is to be part of business conversations. And I ask questions in those business conversations to understand the direction of where we're going to, how we're going to get there, what are the priorities for the next 5, 10 years, and how do we break that down into current priorities for what we will do today, this quarter, next quarter. And the next conversation I try to have with the business leaders is, so what's the role of every member around that table towards achieving the vision that we've set for ourselves? And the next thing that follows that will be to have each leader going back to their teams to build what we will design as a cascade from that focus group of, okay, here's what purpose is, here's what our vision is. So how do you then go back and communicate to make sure that every individual in the organization understands their role to achieving the goal? And I say to employees as well that one question I love to ask them is, so how does your job contribute to our bottom line? And I ask it of everybody. I don't ask it just of the managers. I don't ask it of just the CEO. I ask it of my colleagues. I ask it of myself. And I ask of individuals who consider themselves blue collar workers or shop floor workers, or even a receptionist. How does your role contribute to achieving our bottom line? And the only way that individual is able to connect what they do clearly to the business of the organization is clarity of understanding how they've been communicated to in the first place. If that was never made known to them, when you get the surprise look on somebody when you ask that question, is A, they've never been told, or they've never even seen themselves as part of my job contributes to an organization in that manner. I'm a receptionist. How does my role contribute to the organization or to the organization's bottom line? Like, why are you asking me that question? Come on, because I want to know that you understand that. And so fundamentally, one of the things that I've been part of successfully in all my organization is a process called the line of sight meetings. It's an annual action every year. We build and plan line of sight conversations because it starts with our company plan around September, deciding what the business priorities will be. And so my job as the HR professional is there to work to understand how we plan for the line of sight leading into the next year. And that means that at the end of the exercise in the beginning of Q1, we have clearly communicated our business of the year. What are we going to do? And how does every team in the organization contribute to that goal? If we don't do it clearly, and so we use a variety of means or ways and channels. So the first one is the senior executives themselves having a strategy session, deciding what needs to be done, and each person contributing to that. But then my role as the HR practitioner will then be to take that information into the different sub-teams. I have my colleagues who also work with different teams as well to partner with that, to agree with beautiful colleagues like Henry in the team to say, plan with the internal communications department, what levers shall we highlight the most? And how should we tailor this to the different groups in the organization? I love one of the things I've done in the past where we work with 3 different workforces, the factory workforce, the sales force, and the head office groups. And those 3 groups all form part of the same company, but they just like to take in information differently. And so the objective of my line of sight is to make sure that I understand who needs what and how they are going to consume it. And one of the goals of a successful line of sight is at the end of the outcome, performance objectives are set, and that helps to drive business productivity and performance. And all through the year, we will communicate on progress towards achieving those goals in forms of town halls. And there are several reminders or memory tools that we build around the factory, around the head office, around the sales force that they have as reminders. So the big communication is chunked down into little bites with very clear memory reminders, and all the different touch points that we have across the year during a quarter end, a half year end, and even at the end of the full year to celebrate our accomplishments, always ties back to, here's what we said we're going to do, here's how we've been doing it, and here's your role in achieving that. All that has helped, build successful teams that I've been part of. And yeah, I can tell you when it doesn't work either, but I think If I've spent up my 5 minutes, let me know, but I'll come back to when
yes,
it
you
didn't work
have,
as well.
definitely.
Okay.
Yes, you have. But I think we're on the right track. You've mentioned on the tools and breaking it down from the long-term vision. You've also told us how he also ties in. So we're going to go quickly to Henry. Henry, please lay on what Kamal has said as to our topic.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's very important that for us as comms people, I mean, that we understand the essence of the organization. So right from the vision that is formulated, the mission of how we're going to achieve that, and business strategies and business business strategies and plans for the year are clearly communicated, and you can understand where we come in as professional people. Now, I work in a bank. A lot of numbers and jargons and technologies that are used. Not everybody who works in a bank is a banker. I mean, I joke and tell my friends that, well, I'm a bank worker, I'm not a banker. Because there are professionals who are bankers who actually perform the duty of banking. But I am an enabler for the banking job. So how do I connect all the other people together to ensure that they clearly understand the set lines that we are going to, after we're charting for ourselves for the year, and we achieve our set targets. And so we talk about our profitability. Bottom line, I mean, Kamal was talking about business product profitabilities and how HR people would bring out productivity of their people. But if we don't clearly communicate the strategies and things we put in place to help us achieve the profitability, then we're missing a line. It's not only for us to communicate on those lines, but that we also have a role to play. So what are comms people supposed to do? The various things we do as comms practitioners, be it internal communications, external communications, looking at stakeholder engagement, looking at brand management and building brand equity for the organization, are important steps that you need to help you improve on that profitability. And there are other factors that you need to do. So from where I see, one of the things that I'm big on doing also is that, because most people like Kamal and my colleagues in finance will say that, okay, comms people are cost centers. Hello, we are not cost centers. We are revenue centers, because if we don't put the organization out there for people to understand the things that we do, it becomes very difficult for your sales force and the marketers to go out there to go and sell and drive value for the organization. And therefore, it behoves on us as comms people to be able to understand the role that we play within the value chain of the business and clearly demonstrate the value that we bring to the table. It's not enough to be there to say that I've put out adverts, I've written press releases, I've put out communications about the organization. But we need to be able to demonstrate the value that we bring to the organization, because that's the only way you justify your seat at the table. See, I mean, there have been many professionals that have been there before communication. Communications, I think, I mean, my view is still one of the new professions, new around the business table. And therefore, if the table could only accommodate 5, and you're coming in, there's already HR, there's finance, there's strategy, there's operations, the CEO himself is there. Where's the place for you? There's no place for you. So if they move around and get you into the table, you need to justify yourself. You're not just there to add to the numbers. And therefore, those things are important for us as responsible to begin to show the value that we bring to the table. I tell people that when you do things, don't tell anybody what you have done. You need to show the evidence, show the value. And therefore, demonstrating the value we bring to the organizational success is very important. And finally, before I pause, is that we need to also connect effectively the various internal stakeholders that are there. So they are the marketers who are driving the value, the HR people have a role to play, the legal team is there. For me, we are the glue that brings the organization together. We are the centerpiece that holds the organization together, because I need to demonstrate to HR or show HR what finance is doing, what legal is doing, and therefore bringing all these people together helps sustain the organization through the various means that we use. So yes, we're talking about business and communicators. what are the channels available to us? What are the platforms available? And how are we using these platforms to build cohesion in the workplace, build the bond in the organization, and ensure that people understand themselves, people understand the strategies, understand the business objectives, and can connect in terms of what their roles are. I mean, and Kamal talked about knowing your roles, understand their roles and how they connect to that objective. If we don't do that, then we do not deserve to be at the table, and we don't have a place at the table. So thank you to both. I'll pause here, and then I'm sure, yes, we'll come back for more as we go on.
Right, thank you, Henry. And I underline the word demonstrating value, which is something that you really echoed on. Demonstrating value, like Kamal said, the clarity of communication is in people understanding what they are doing. And you have also said, we must demonstrate that. So there is a value to that messaging from top to bottom, or bottom to even top. And that's where Shola comes in. So Shola is going to connect all the dots around, there is a place of value, there is a place of people. How do you bring people to a sense of purpose and organization to a sense of profit, using communication as a tool and as a channel, of course?
Thanks, Tiboso, and thanks to our other panelists and everyone for joining. I think I've heard a lot of interesting stuff. And I think I liked it when Henry said, "Comes people are," that the normal thing he hears when people say "comes people are cost centers," and he says, that they're not. He also talked about, the fact that we need to demonstrate our value. I think from my perspective, and honestly, this is like, anyways, from my perspective, for communications to be effective, it has to be strategic, it has to be intentional, it has to be outcome driven, it needs to be structured, it has to be tailored. It has to provide for a feedback mechanism, and it must be linked to the business. Now, the reason why many times we hear that refrain about people saying communications is a cost center is because most communications people are always asking for money. We're very budget driven. We're always thinking of what we're going to spend to do things, whereas we're not thinking of how to solve the business problem or the organizational problem. I think if we inserted ourselves in those spaces more intentionally, I think it would affect the way in which we are perceived within our organizations. And then the conversation will shift from whether you are a cost, you are a cost center, or you are actually a third partner solving a problem. So what I learned to do while I worked for several years in my former company was I inserted myself into business conversations. And that's very much in the internal effectiveness space. So for instance, there was a time we had a mandate. We were going to add on about 25,000 barrels of crude oil. And we needed to do it in a different sort of way. There was a whole alternative scenario thing that was developed. And I could tell that there was no communication deliberately being done to make sure that everybody all the way down the line understood that we needed to have a period whereby we were free of certain incidents. There were very specific milestones that we had made to our lenders that we needed to fulfill. I went and I had a conversation with the business in that. But we ended up designing a strategy for them to have a conversation on something that was purely business, purely business. So it was when we had that conversation that they realized that, yes, it's true, we're supposed to have a security-free time, but we haven't really spoken to the security team is not aware. There's some milestones and things we need to do. The people are not really sure the people in logistics are aware. That connect wasn't just happening. So just like Henry said and Kamal also talked about, we're the ones that sort of make that glue happen.
Okay, she's back. Okay, now you're back on. Yes, you can go ahead. You have 1 more minute.
Sorry, I got bumped out. That was really bizarre. And I think I'll just leave it at that. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, heard you clearly. Heard you clearly.
So I think, thank you. So I think my what I would just say is I think we need to get better at solving business problems and not communication problems. I think that's where I would like to see a bit more movement in terms of us as a profession, because I think many times we're trying to solve business problems, we're trying to solve communication problems and not necessarily business problems. Let us make that mind shift and help the organization solve the problems, the pain points using communications. A very subtle distinction, but an important one from a business leader perspective. Thank you. Back to you, Tiboso.
All right, thank you so much. And I think you really layered it as expected, because you spoke about profits is from solving problems, right? So organizations actually are problem solvers in the first instance. So for us to help them in our role as employers or employees, as the case may be, we are actually problem solvers ourselves. And we must be able to insert communication into problem solving. So, and it was the same thing the three of you said, but in different ways. So it really shows that communications is an intrinsic and also a very extrinsic part of the business. You know, Henry talked about if there are 5 seats on the table, communications is already there because these 5 people are already speaking. So let's go over how do we know as comms professional, or how do the business recognize the value of a clearly articulated strategy? When can they tell that you have helped me as a comms professional to clearly articulate my value and my position, and everyone across the layer of my organization can connect to this? So I'll allow you to speak on that. We have a few questions for you while we wait for questions from the audience, and then we'll take a shot at the questions as they come in. So how is it measured when communication has really helped to clearly articulate the value of a business? How do we measure that? Henry, please go first.
Thank you, Tobun. And see, so I made a point in my first submission that when you do something, you don't tell, you show. But there's something very important or very tricky about comms people. You find a lot of the time that when we do things, we say there's a department called research and monitoring. Therefore, they are supposed to monitor or undertake a research about the activities that we have done. Tell you what, nobody better than you can evaluate what you have done. We set ourselves targets on what we want to do, and we can better achieve the measure of what is success. Because for us, for any communication that you set out to undertake, you need to determine what the measure of success is. Or to resolve any business problem, you need to set out what does success look like. And therefore, nobody else can tell you what's successful about your program if you cannot point that out. So you've got to be very clear in putting your strategies together that you are going to be able to evaluate what you have done. That's the first point. When you do that, you don't need for that results for anybody to go and demonstrate or to go and present for you. Again, we talk about being the external people, the spokespersons and the PR people, and we speak for the organizations. But when it comes to presenting reports, I speak from the position of someone who is also a PR educator, comms educator, that lecture on professional programs here in Ghana. And I can tell you that many people tend to take a backseat and leave that for other people to do. And therefore, we are not bringing to the fore the things that we have done and how they have helped to solve business problems. So several examples that I can give, but of course, based on where I work now, you're looking at, so I talk about profitability. So you're looking at having card sales or increasing savings, and we're going to run a promo. And it probably may sit with a card department or transaction banking or retail bank or whatever. But whatever ideas they have, who gives it leg to run? It comes people. And therefore, when you have put these together and you have been able to undertake campaign, that you said, okay, I was looking at communicating to 1 million people. Did I achieve 1 million people? What were the tools I used and how did I get to the people? You need to demonstrate that. You need to bring in the value when you reach them. How did you convert these people to making business decisions to purchase your product? Now, when you have done all of those things together, you need to put together the report and show to the people. So, like Shola said, you are helping to solve a business problem. You are not just communicating or taking money to go and spend and do communications for the organization. There's a role for building the reputation of the organization. But if you are driven and you have a purpose for what you are going to do, you are the best person to be able to bring those things out. And demonstrate it clearly to people, for everyone to understand that you have contributed in dealing with that business solution. But if you flip the coin, you don't always have to wait for the other departments or the business team to bring you a solutions bring something before you go into offer a solution. You understand the business, and you know what the gaps are and what areas we are not working well or we are not improving on. You need to be able to identify these things, tease them out, and throw them out. You may not even be the person to be able to go and resolve this or deal with them. But one of the things that we do as Comsco is to look at risk factors that could impact on the business. Because one of the things I don't like, but everybody have to do, is managing crisis. Because managing crisis is such a big deal and can throw everybody off. And therefore, what are the risk factors that you can identify to help you, one, minimize the risk, or that when they do happen or when they eventually happen, that you are prepared well enough to be able to deal with it, that does not impact negatively on the organization. And therefore, we need to put all those things together and clearly push them in the forefront, that we are in a place to resolve those or deal with those business issues and communicating them across the value chain, right from the junior staff of the organization, the drivers, your security, your across to the senior
Everyone.
people, management, to the boardroom, everybody along the line.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Henry. And I know that Shola here, when you mentioned crisis comes, management, that's a forte, and if there's anything she advocates for, it's that you can't afford to have a crisis, but you must very well prepare for it. But leading back to what you said around, we have clearly articulated this messaging, and we now have to distribute it to different stakeholders. And that was Kamal. Kamal, would you like to tell us, how do you target for each layer? What are the tools? What are the strategy? I want to talk to the junior staff. I want to talk to even the regulators. You have to communicate differently, the same message. What are the tools that you would prefer, or you tell us here, that comms professionals should begin to use to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll touch on that just to also add on, and it kind of speaks to this particular point as well. Henry talks a lot, and I love his points about how the role of the comms professional in the organization and how it translates to the business profit. And I love what Shola was saying in that, the way she kind of put it together. What I lay onto that is, even as you, an employee or leader in the organization, your first job is to be able to communicate effectively. Okay, it's what you do every single day. In an email, when you pick up the phone, when you run into your colleagues in the corridor, what you say to them, or what you say, it could be misunderstood or repeated, and suddenly it becomes gospel. Like, oh yeah, this is what so-and-so said. But then it probably wasn't even the intended channel or message that you wanted to pass across. One thing you say about the target audiences and what tools we can use, I'll give an example of understanding that to also layer it properly. I joined when I arrived in Canada, one of the first teams I worked with, I was told that they had suffered through several years of business losses, and they had just completed an engagement survey to understand, okay, what are the pain points? And my first task was, okay, actually, my goal was take and run the survey as the HR person, and then come and tell us what you learned from it. The outcome, and this is one of the tools for measuring effectiveness of communication, like Henry was talking about. When I read the outcomes, one thing stood out. Nobody believed in top management. For whatever reason, top management was considered as this group of people that were considered to be untrustworthy, and they were not believed. But then when the question reached to their immediate supervisors, there's such a high spike in trust between the immediate supervisors and the employees, because there was a sense of either kinship brought out of victimhood. When everybody doesn't trust top management, well, the supervisors closest to us, yeah, they kind of get us. And so they're also suffering the same things we're suffering. So when they tell me what to do, I believe them more. And I trust what they're telling me is the right thing, okay? And so I picked out that particular data points, and I amplified it in my report to the senior leaders and said, I think you guys shouldn't show up at any of your comm sessions anymore. I think you need to find new speakers who are your next layer, because whatever you've been saying in the past is not landing well with these guys. And it was a tough pill to swallow, because the CEO was this super guy, very proud of his messaging, very confident in what he says, and loves it. Yeah, sorry, Jorge, they don't like to hear you speak, because they just know you're going to talk what you want, not what they need. And it's, again, like you said, it's subtle difference, but yeah. So he agreed that I should go with my plan. And so what I did was to hold a session of all those, call them middle managers in the organization, and shared with that, shared the outcome of that report with them. And for a lot of them, they were reluctant because they always took direction from above. It was such a hierarchy-driven organization that we take orders from above. Why are you asking us to come and give out the orders? No. It's not the orders. Have a conversation with your teams. They trust you more. And here's the data that shows that. So combination of data plus the opportunity for them to step into effective communicator roles gave a lot of them the interest to take it on. And we discovered some new gems of people that we didn't know we could trust to do certain things, okay? So what we did was then I took all the comms materials around where we were going to for the business, what were some of the immediate priorities, and it turned out to be such a well-received message. Why? Because once we saw the business performance was from some team managers, the before and after were very, very different outcomes, because suddenly it seemed like these people could speak their language. And it was the same tools. So what was it that made the difference in terms of practical tools? One, the content was the first one, and content layered at different levels. There was chunked up business 4 or 5 goals, but when it came to each team, they were broken down into, here's what you need for your team. Of the 5, you don't necessarily need to deliver on all, but here's the 4 or 5 things on your team that you need to deliver. So breaking it down and targeting the content for the specific audience, but also inviting that trusted member of the business, of the team, to lead on the communication really, really helped. And of course, the final piece was the feedback loop that we brought in at the end to make sure that we're asking, how did that work? What could we do differently? And so rolling back up to the leadership team, they actually felt relieved and actually felt successful that they empowered the next layer of organization to deliver on communication. So I'd say to anyone holding a business communication, leading a business communication, you have to understand your audience, understand your content, understand your message, very much understand your audience. And if you're new to the audience, ask questions before you step into that moment. You know, try to understand or visualize the type of audience. And you may have some preconceived notions, validate them before you make assumptions. Okay, whatever notion you have about what you're going to say, to who you're going to say it to, ensure it is validated. And yeah, I'll pause there for now.
Right, thank you very much. So content, empowerment, because in even clearly articulating your message, you're actually empowering people to take action across all the line. Empowering, even having to tell the CEO that he's not the right person to communicate. You're actually empowering him in understanding that, hey, the business direction is changed now. And I'll just go to Shola quickly. Because organizations come in various shapes and form and there are various stages, at what time, when should maybe like a late stage organization or a growth focused organization or even a startup, in what phases, how should they, in these different phases, how should they approach, communicating their vision, mission, organizational goal in that regards?
So thank you, I think there is, so this is me. I believe that there are fundamental principles of communication, and I think they apply throughout the life cycle of a business. I think businesses, and I have a certain theory, I think businesses can afford to be a little bit loose about communications when they are relatively small. And I say that very cautiously, but if you have about 100 people or more working, you have to be very strategic, you have to be very intentional from the get-go, simply because the opportunities for miscommunication become more as organizations become bigger and larger. For that reason, I would say, first of all, even the sharing of vision, I think One problem we have with communications is that, first of all, everybody thinks that anyone can communicate. No, not everybody can communicate. Not everybody knows how to communicate intentionally. But to be a successful business person, you must know how to communicate and communicate well. So in your growth and early stages, sharing the vision, both with your investors, potential investors, and board members, as well as your employees, is very important. As you begin to grow, you also need to carry them along on that growth journey as well. So you then need to do a lot of what Kamal has talked about, where you profile your audience in terms of who are my internal audiences, which are the parts of my business that are critical to my growth, what are the enablers that I need from outside, who are the stakeholders that I need to get involved with, what should I be telling them, when should I be telling them, how should I be telling them, what's most important for them to know, what's most important for them to do, and how do I want them to feel about this growth thing that I'm embarking on. So what I've just mentioned there is the know, feel, and do of communications. And that has to apply at every stage. I think, so I'm talking broadly principles. And I think at every stage of the growth of a business, whether it's at early stages, whether it's from project phase, you really need to be very intentional about communication. You need to map your audiences. You need to know what you need to say at every point, and you need to carry people along. I won't differentiate so much about the principles of communication because they are the same. Even if you're running a one-man, if you're running a one-man show, you still have to communicate externally. You still have to have people working with you. But then it has to be more structured and intentional and complex when you have more relationships that you're dealing with and you require action from people who are outside of you. So I think that's it. I just want to also talk about one question, respond to one question that came up about measurements. I think, this is my theory, my hypothesis. I think as communications professionals, it will serve our purpose better if we have measurements that are tied to desired outcomes for the business, behavioral change, depending on what it is, and then business outcomes. So for instance, we're trying to get a new license, or we're trying to renew our contract, or we want we want to reduce our safety, increase our safety performance. We want less people falling sick. We have to tie it to things that are tangible. Otherwise, I don't support having communications measures. In other words, I held 2 webinars, I did 2 town halls. That's rubbish. 200 people attended, that's crap. So really, what I want to test is if I had a town hall, for instance, if we're laying off staff, and we wanted to have a town hall so that we can engage people and understand why we need to lay off staff. Why am I doing that? So that news can bed properly. We do not have staff on rest. People still go on and do their work. That would be the measure I would put forward. And I would engage the business leaders and say, this is how we know this has worked. We then tailor the entire process, the messaging, the communication, the layering, the cascades on that line. When at the end of it all, it goes pretty well, seamlessly, there is no issue, then I know my communications have succeeded. It's not event-driven, it is outcome-driven. So I think I think this applies, these are principles of communication that apply across board, regardless of how big your organization is and regardless of how long you've been in business but I think if the stakes are higher, there's more risk involved, then of course you have to be much more intentional than the person whose risk is not at the level that yours is. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So tailored, measured, it's about the outcome as well. What is it that we have planned to achieve and how have we fared? Haven't seen the results now. And I couldn't have said that better. And I saw Henry and Kamal also nodding and assenting to what you've said. So thank you. So let's go to focusing around the ESG. So people call these things different names: people, profits, planets, ESG, sustainability. And Rotsi Olaniyo is asking, let's discuss ESG. Let's discuss the people, profit, and purpose components, because this is around the long-term sustainability of any organization. And as Shola has said, communication does not start when you are growing. Communication starts from the day you decided to put yourself into solving people's problems to generate value. So comms professional, what's the role they play in the new phase of discussing sustainability from a perspective of social impacts, governance, policy advocacy, leaving our footprints, the organization's footprint? What's the role? Kamal, I'm going to ask that you answer that first, but I would like that everyone have a go at this question just in 2 minutes, which I know is no time, but please, let's go for this.
Yeah, no, great question. And I think it's such a critical time for us. The impact of our actions and activities on the planet is what is causing all of this to become more resources that we've all taken, just understood that they're finite. And the way we use them continues to cause more harm to our own environment, and it's becoming even hotter. The planet is hot. I love some of the books by Thomas Friedman. The world is flat, but then the world is flat and hot. So those are great books that just tell you the power of one person's action in one city in somewhere and how it affects the whole world. So our roles as, and I like the piece where it feels like in Africa, we think ESG is, or we believe ESG is a thing to do after we solve hunger, and after we solve poverty, after we solve, there are more issues. Why should I care about where I throw, a piece of pure water bag when I just got my first pure water bag to drink all day? You're not asking me to worry about where I dropped the bag. But actually, this is where it starts from. In the organizations, how does it help drive profitability? The consciousness of the society has to be involved in the business of the organization to help move that. If you're just one voice in the voice, as a voiceless city where everybody's worried about so many other things, and for you, your goal to drive profit is to try to push an agenda around ESG in an environment where the consciousness is not even there, it's hard to push that. And you talk about government and policy as well. I'd like to see the communication as coalition of efforts, and I love what Shola is. Shola comes from the oil and gas world. They drove collective change at the government level to influence some of the actions that we now see in that sector. And the manufacturing sector as well, they collectively drive that. Individual organizations in your company, how can you change things? The things you say must be done. What you communicate to, if you say you want to drive a green practice in my organization, how you communicate that, you must build practices that help to achieve that. I've had companies where as simple as reusing photocopied paper is their green action. There's always a stack of box next by. If you print and you don't need it, put it there, as long as it's not confidential. But then if it's not a part of how you do things, what you say just doesn't make any difference. And to what Shola and Henry were saying about measuring outcomes, at the end of the year, we don't talk about the number of initiatives that we launched to prove ESG. We talk about the important business outcomes that the ESG initiatives have delivered, how much greener we've been, how much more sustainable we've become, and what component of our business profitability that has contributed to. So if you don't treat A to B in that manner, what we say links to what we do. I call it that leadership should have a high say-do ratio. What you say and what you do, very, very high ratio. And then, of course, when you measure the outcomes, directly link it to what matters to us all. So that's how I see ESG as making a difference. Thank you.
Shola, please.
Yes, thanks for that question. I think, so I have, the way I'm going to address that question, which is a very good one, by the way, is because I've had a lot of thought about this before now, or a bit of thought. And I think when we look at the ESG, area, there's the environment piece, which people like, the oil industry is very, very concerned about generally. There's the governance piece, which is a blind spot for many of us coming from this part in Nigeria. I mean, for me, that's really curious, but I think that governance is, and I think it's that way, particularly for companies that do not have foreign investment, therefore they do not have investors they're answerable to. It's the founders, so that corporate governance piece is just a problem, and it holds those businesses back from being multi-generational. Where I think there's a big exposure, potential exposure for companies, particularly in Nigeria, I can't speak for other parts of the world, maybe when Henry speaks, he can give us a view from Ghana, is in the social space. Because I think that area is where there's an interface with public interest, with social media, and where there's likely to be an intersection that will cause problems for the company. And we are seeing a lot of this happening now. If you check the principles under social, there is human rights, supply chain standards, labor management, health and safety, human capital development. Those are the things that are causing people to be in the news, having crises, the type that Henry was talking about. So what Henry said, the role of a comms person is to draw attention to such things, mitigate risk. If there is something about your health and safety standards, a labor issue that looks as if it's not a big deal, it's likely to cause a problem and end up on social media, as we have seen it happen to some people. The way you treat your staff, we've seen what's been going on in the tech startup world in Nigeria recently. All of that, that social piece, in fact, the CEO lost his, well, has been asked to step aside because of that. So that social space is where I think comms people have a role to shine a light and let the organization be more aware that there's a sensitivity in that area. So I think it's really multi-layered. I think a lot of us, the whole ESG conversation is very complex and it really plays off in different sectors in different ways. My sense is that the industries or the sectors or the businesses that have foreign investors tend to be more focused. And then the state of the business will determine whether it's environment or social or governance. But generally in Nigeria as a whole now, where I see even smaller businesses having a greater risk is in the social piece. But it's a developing discipline area. A lot of conversation still needs to have in that space for business leaders to see, take it as being important. I don't know if that answers your question, but those are my thoughts on that area.
Yeah, I'll allow Henry go, please, quickly.
So for me, I mean, when it comes to these issues, I say that it's got to be part of our lifestyles. And we see comms people are the conscience of the organizations. We are the blood of the organization. Therefore, we've got to make this a part of our lifestyle. Now, beyond the governance and strategies that we're speaking about, one or two important areas that I think we also need to look at is education and empowerment. Educating people and empowering them and making it a part of, and when I say a lifestyle, making it a part of a lifestyle such that you're not only using formal means or very formal ways to communicate these and follow them through. Because when you are changing things, you do change communications, you realize that it's difficult, people resist change, it's normal. And therefore, how do we bring these things to bear in our organizations in a way that people will accept it without seeing that you are getting them to change from what they're used to? So that's important. Now, how do you also connect the deliverables or the outcomes that you expect into our daily life? So Kamal talk about, give examples of how you're conserving paper and all of that. But how do you also, for example, move to a paperless system where if previously you process, you get approvals through, you do a memo paper and get people to many the paper to approve, say that, okay, send me that request via email, or create a system that talks about initiating a process and going through and getting the approval without any paper at all. Now, when you begin such a process, for example, there may be resistance. People are used to paper, the normal way of doing that. It may also involve some cost at the beginning. But if you look at, I mean, the examples that Kamal gave, even the same paper usage, long run, you realize that you make a lot of savings on cost, which saves the environment. And therefore, how do we draw the social and sustainability issues that could impact us and make it a part of the lifestyle of the organization, so that people now take on new behaviors, they take on new ways of doing things without necessarily thinking of how they are helping to sustain the environment, but that is your goal and you achieve that. And that's very difficult thing for comms people to do by putting it in the fiber of the organization, that it becomes what we do, it becomes part of our culture, it becomes the way we live and do things, and that we are not coerced and threatened with punishment and sanctions like sometimes my Kamal and his friends like to do, as HR enforcement, but that it becomes just the thing that we're expected to do, and we love to do it because it makes us happy that we do those things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. So I like when you say education and empowerment, because ESG is not really focused on only organizations. It's beginning to impact even our lives. So it's a take home. It's either you bring to work or you take back to the office. So it's closely related, and one aspect of it affects another. So when we indeed educate people or empower them to start thinking about, the environmental impact of their actions, social impact of their characters, and even, governance, how do we relate to policies and everything that we stand to gain? I think these are the messaging that the three of you have really aptly answered. Kamal talked about having a I say do ratio. It's not only what you say or what we print out, it's essentially how have we, at the end of the day, really can itemize, we said this and we did this. And Shola said it's not in the number of webinars, it's not in the number of, or we sent out news press brief and all of that. It is in, this is the desired outcome, this is what we want to achieve, and everybody can connect to that, from the man at the gates to the man who really founded the organization in itself. And that's the focus of this conversation. What's the place of communications in people, profit, and purpose for any organization? But I'm beginning to see that it's diving even into our personal lives, because if we cannot CEO our own lives, then we definitely cannot even CEO any roles at all. I'm going to look quickly into the comments and see, just to highlight comments that have been going on before we take more questions. So Miriam says, tying communications measurement to tangible outcomes. This makes a lot of sense. And this is what the three of you have said. Communications measurement is not, it has to be business driven. Everyone must be able to say, this is how my role contributes to the profits we are making this quarter. This is what I did. And Kamal really hammered on that. Every business leader, every division leader must be able to identify how they contributed into that role. So I'm going to take you on one more question. You talked about the social impact around the ESG. Social impact is a bit more around character, oftentimes, and this is, in some instances, maybe intangible. Now we have business goal that is directly correlated to numbers, directly correlated to profits. How do we as comms professional tie social impacts? When we begin to measure our workforce happiness index of our workforce, how do people come to work happy? How do they connect to the goal? How can we tangibilize this? How can we ensure that we have measures to say, as an organization, we have achieved on the S in the ESG, on the purpose in the ESG?
So I think, what you're describing is looking at your internal organizations and trying to see, sort of like running a social temperature gauge to see how they're feeling. You're just getting a sense of the feeling. There's that aspect of that. So that's where you talk about all these things about employee engagement. If my employees are engaged, they will do this. If they're engaged, how we know they're engaged is, for instance, how fast they fill the surveys, how often they show up at the town halls, how they respond to how many people read the emails that come in from the senior leaders, and how certain things, just how the organization works as a whole, even some of the sort of things that Kamal talked about. I saw the question up there. We talked about how to measure things that are intangible. Now I'm going to share my hypothesis and my perspective, because I've been in that space where comms people have spent a lot of time worrying over how to measure intangible things in a business setting. Honestly, I don't think I would always look for something tangible, because when people are happy, there's an action that demonstrates happiness. There's an action that also shows positivity. There's also an action that demonstrates negativity. So for instance, when I was running internal comms for the organization that I worked with before, whenever there were certain things we developed amongst ourselves as sort of like little temperature gauges for sensing how the organization felt. It was, for instance, no questions at a town hall. People not attending town halls when we invite them to it. More questions coming up outside the town hall than inside the town hall. Those were things that we used personally amongst ourselves to gauge, or no one calling us afterwards to say that was a good town hall. Because you'd always have those friends that would call you up. So whenever we had any of those, we knew we had missed the bar. So it has to be something that you develop based on your knowledge of your own audience. I like it when Kamal said, don't go into communications blind, and that even if you don't understand your audience, find out. Because at the end, it's just like, I mean, let's take it home, like Tubosu always tries to tell us. Imagine if I have a key stakeholder at home, whether it's a friend, a sister, a mother, a child. Not everyone is going to come and tell you I'm not happy, or a spouse. But you have to be able to know the things that they do that communicate that they're not happy or they're happy. So that then becomes your intangible / tangible outcome of behavior. I don't think that communication should be left as intangible. I think we have hurt our profession by telling ourselves that communications is intangible and it cannot be measured. I honestly don't believe that. I don't think so. And I would put a challenge to anybody there. If you have any communications challenge that you're struggling to find measures with, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I will find a measure for you. I was head of external relations strategy and planning for many years while working in my organization. That was my job, to find tangible measures for intangible things. You can always link it to something tangible. So anyways.
Right. Thank you so much. And I think that settles it, because really, if not, then we would still be struggling for the importance of comms if we can't really have a desired outcome and we can measure against. So everything, as much as possible, we must be able to connect to the value of it. How do people feel? And I like this word, the temperature gauge of the organization. And that's a tangible in itself. Right. Kamala, I have a question for you, and I'm taking you back to, the ESG again, if you don't mind. But this time around, I've just focused on, communication professionals are often faced with translating executive thinking. How do we ensure that in all of this, the content is not lost in translation and in transition? Because when you were talking, it was coming to my mind like, I designed different messaging for different people. But even a simple communications game of me telling you something.
Yeah, Chinese whispers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, you're right. The Chinese whispers game, where by the time I say, I'm going down the street, by the time Henry is repeating it, it's like, he said he's traveling. And then when you hear it, you go up, but that's not what I said. I just said I'm going down the street, So I think the first part of translation or transitioning of an executive's messaging to the rest of the organization starts with, where Shola comes from. Like, what's the desired outcome? What behavior changes do we want to see? What action do we want people to take? What do we want them to, what's the takeaway from this message for everybody? And so what typically happens is the two ways an exec could, layer that out. One, to his top 100 or top 200 directors who are, in the first tier of leadership in the organization, the same EBITDA, use the same kind of jargon, use this kaga, use all that, assuming and knowing that they understand it. Sadly, of the 100, maybe about 20% don't actually understand it, but everybody just kind of agree that, we all kind of get it, okay? So, and the message stays at that top line level. The idea behind that is he's sharing just enough for the rest of them to build in their pieces into it. And it's clear enough to say, this is the goal I want to achieve, right? And this is the goal for this organization as we've built it together. So the first thing that the message that comes out of the executive is from the table of the exec, okay, as an example. Now, the comms expert, not just my good friend Henry, together with us as the HR professionals, it is our job to understand what the business need is, or what the business outcome that we're trying to solve, because we will guide and even influence the language of the communication that the CEO will write. And it's our understanding of what needs to be achieved that helps to influence what you say. You don't just take and do from the CEO and say, okay, I will go and do it. Then you walk out of the office and go, and then you kind of have this blank look. In that moment, you can shape and structure what needs to be said and how it needs to be said. I love what both my colleagues have also talked about when it comes to averting crisis or planning ahead for crisis. We know what the impact of regulatory change can mean. We know what the impact of an election in a country like Nigeria can mean. So when you know that may come, so what action should we be taking in 2022 to avert what may be a regulatory change that's coming ahead of 2023. And what actions should we be taking now? So that message, when I go out, when I cascade that to the different teams, it is with the logistics and supply chain team, how much inventory should we pre-stock and what actions should we take to avert an out of stock situation because our borders could get shut when we don't plan for it. And here's how that contributes to the sales targets that we've planned for December, because we know it will be dirty in December. Okay, so what actions are we taking to plan for that business outcome? And we know that it's probably, and even if I look at the trend of our sales over the last couple of years, that's when we peak the most. So what actions are we taking to drive for that support? So my messaging or takeaway from the meeting of the CEO is, one, tailor it to the different groups, but focus on specific actions I need them to change. And then I also will use, I love the principles that Shola keeps sharing, that in terms of those principles, they really don't change whatever message you're communicating. What changes is, the content, the context of your organization. And that's the nuance that you must understand. Really know your business, know your people. Changing and influencing the message comes easier.
Thank you very much, Kamal. So I'm going to pick on one action word there when you mentioned reconcile. And that's what Chido also wrote in chat. The submissions that we have all made underlines the importance of the PR framework of RACE: research, action, communicate, and evaluate. So we must always reconcile from based on research and now evaluation. What are the gaps and what are the opportunities that we see there? Henry, I'm coming to you, and I would like to direct this question focused on productivity. How do you ensure that while we are chasing productivity, our employees are fully engaged? Because most times you may, especially when we've set goals and we go into the business of the day, what you'll find out is there's a tilt. One workforce gets it, driving towards productivity, the other one. How do you ensure that every time there's a balance?
Yeah, thank you. So let me just throw in a little point from where Shola left off before I come to the part of it. Now, one important thing is to always answer, no matter what you do, the so what question. So the earlier answer about the intangible outcomes. So you did a webinar, 100 people came. So what does it mean? And you must always be able to understand and explain the so what question. Super important. But come back to productivity. I believe strongly that you don't expect what you don't expect. So when we talk about the monitoring evaluation, and you just spoke about the risk model and all of that, it's important that along the line, you don't wait for the process to end before you come and inspect. The expectations will be dashed. So you inspect what you expect. So that's the first one. The other thing is that as you work, you need to bond the team together. So as we go along, do some team bonding, team building exercises that helps the team because we're working together. Remember, the output of one person provides an input for another person. And therefore, if you don't understand that I need to close my output early enough to enable the next person to also pick the baton and run with, then we'll be failing the organization. And therefore, you need to be able to knit the organizations closely. And Kamal mentioned the point about HR and constable working closely together. Super. I mean, for me, I don't believe it's step was. Organizations differ. You find an organization where internal communication sits with HR, and you find an organization where internal comms sits with comms. I don't mind where it sits. You need to collaborate and work effectively to ensure that, bottom line, we are achieving business objectives. Because that is the reason why we are there. I was having induction for a group of new hires yesterday, and I mentioned to them that, I mean, when you're coming in, your interview onboarding process, did you know anybody? Who did you come with? Everybody answered alone. I said, so when you are fired, what do? You work out alone, or when you are tired, you work out alone. But while you are there in the organization, you work together to achieve results. So it's important that we provide the enabler that helps people work together and connect. I mean, before now, until this webinar, I haven't met Shola. We don't know. I don't know Kamal, but we have to work together. We've had some great sessions and getting together, and we've chit-chatted, and then I'm sure you all know I'll take a big idea of Nigeria that Ghana beat you to the World Cup ticket, you know, and I love to do that. But when we have these conversations and laugh at each other and create these things that helps us to bond, we are better placed to be able to deliver the results that the organization expects of us. So team bonding is one of the very important things. The other thing is that we need to inspect what we expect along the line, not at the end of the delivery of the outcome.
Let me bring that home. Right. Okay, come on, please go ahead. Yes.
Apologies. I just wanted to add a couple of points. This is one of the areas that I try to, midwife a lot, because almost like we talk about the pulse of the organization. So in addition to what Henry has said, a couple of other things that I think should be important in achieving that engagement within the team. Communication starts to tell us the what. Using communication, we should also talk about the how. Okay, how should we achieve this? And all the things Henry was listing in terms of how should we unwind? How should we celebrate success? How should we manage crisis? How should we, give and receive information about what worked well and what didn't work well? Okay, and of course, during those discussions and communications about the how, being clear about it helps to influence the what. I love what he said about, breaking the ice. Yeah. There must be actions the manager should do to help to go through moments of conflict, storming, where inter-collaboration doesn't happen. I'm a big proponent, and I say to my teams that internal competition is the killer for external competition. You should focus on working together to beat external competition, not competing internally between HR and finance and logistics and warehousing. This is detrimental to the organization. So how we work together, what are the things that matter? What are the things that we need to do, but how? And communicating about the how, speaking to specific non-work related things and communicating about how they influence what we do, just, completely helps achieve great performance and improves engagement.
Well said. I was actually going to take a dig back at Henry, but thank you for, so you connected the how, and, so how we do it actually determines the what at the end of the day. And that's the premise of communications, using us or using the channel and the tool as a method of even evaluating profitability, sense of purpose, governance, regulatory framework, and all of that. And Henry asked, how do we, you don't expect what you don't inspect. And he talked about the webinar in itself, and you can look at the chart and the pulse of the group. I guess is also one tool to take away from here. In as much as we are having a conversation, it is important to always check the pulse. Shola also mentioned this, and that's what Kamal Ahmad on. What are people getting out of what you are saying? We've talked about people, we've talked about the purpose agenda, we've talked about the profit. So communications professional really tie this knot together, and they use all the channels and bring in all the tools to measure, as Shola has made us to know. There is nothing that isn't measurable. So we're running to a close. We have about 3 more minutes, and I'd just like to give each of our panelists the opportunity to wrap their conversation up in 1 minute or less. Shola, please go first.
So thanks, everybody. You've been a wonderful audience. I think some things I'd just like to leave with you all. And thanks to our panelists for joining us. Thank you so much. We're so grateful. Communications, always remember, if you're a communication professional, you are the eyes of the organization. You see what the leaders do not see. They trust and they rely you, and they should trust and rely you to see what they do not see. You're also the ears of the organization. If you have positioned yourself well, feedback will come directly to you from within the organization. Be bold to have the tough conversations with leaders and make sure that that feedback gets in. If it's not happening through formal platforms, create informal platforms where you can make that feedback known. It helps the organization. We are also the glue of the organization. is if you're a comms professional, your organization is dysfunctional, there is it's not connected, take it as your responsibility. Don't wait until someone says so. Now, there was a scenario that Kamal talked about when he said disconnect between senior leaders and the rest of the organization. And a lot of people, a few people on the chat said it's a common scenario. If you have that kind of disconnect in your organization, please don't let it stay that way. It can be addressed through intentional communications. You can bridge the gap between your leaders. Your leaders should not be allowed to be disconnected, because that also creates some problems at the middle management level. It's good feedback. You may take the temporary whatever that Kamal did, but please solve it. That gap must be bridged. Thank you.
Kamal, your closing point.
I think it's awesome. I'd say overall, you should be, I like the words intentional in communication. I also like the word plan with your communication. And for me as well, the final word for me is assess impact, not just what was said. Thank you.
Henry, your turn.
So I'd like to re-emphasize the point that we made earlier. Demonstrate the value you bring to the organization. Speaking about it throughout this conversation, evaluate, measure, inspect what you expect. And the bottom line is, after you've done all of that, show what you have done. Don't go around telling people. Let the evidence be there, available for everybody to see. It's super important as principal. And that's one of the ways we can demonstrate the value that we bring to the organization. Like I said, mind you, we are not cost centers, we are revenue centers, because we help to provide the enabling environment for the business teams to sell and to deliver value. It's been great having you being a part of this conversation. I'd like to thank the team for inviting me. I look forward to more engagement, and let's keep the conversation going. It shouldn't end here. Let's keep connecting and keep going. And
we still will support Ghana at the World Cup. Don't worry.
Oh, come on, you don't have a choice. I know you will support Ghana. We are brothers. I mean, you have no choice. Who are you going to support? I mean, it's Ghana, of course. Come on.
Now we are brothers, right?
We've always been brothers, and you know it.
Right.
It's just sad that we have to take the ticket away from you, but I mean, we're brothers. We've always been.
I totally agree with you, and thank you everyone. This is as much as we'll be able to take, and I read all the comments. It's been a great session, a time well spent, very insightful. Thank you, Shola. Thank you, Kamal. Thank you, Henry. The recording would definitely. I'm having an echo, but I think you can all hear me. The recording is definitely going to be available on YouTube, and you can catch up on it and learn as you get on your role every day at work. So please remember, Shola said it, we have business desired outcome should be the focus. Kamal, say, do temperature gauge. That's what Kamal said. No, pardon me. He said, we must have a I say do ratio. And this also feeds back to even communications. I can do this, and then the organization is testing the pulse. Henry rounded it up by saying impact, strategic, our communication must be such that people, the workforce must be able to connect to it, and profitability must remain a measure, and everyone must be aligned on that number. So thank you so much for joining us. From you, audience, thank you for the interactions. I hope that you have picked up a lot of insights on tips on getting better in your day-to-day role, because I know that one thing that have come to me is that communications can do a lot of things, and one of it is that it can help you to relearn what you already know. It can help you to deepen what you already understand. So there is no end to it, because as humans we evolve, our organizations itself evolve. The world has moved from strategy to sustainability now. It still means the same thing, but the focus is now on how do these three elements connect together. Thank you. I'd like to say special thanks to everybody on the call, especially IABC members online, people who have been able to join us from different parts of the world. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to having you. Remember that you can do communications better when you join the IABC West African Interest Group. and we look forward to receiving you. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and have a good day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll stop recording now, and then you can have tete-a-tetes about Ghana jollof rice and football and all the in-betweens. And you can leave your contacts down, Henry, like Kamal did, so that people can connect with you on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, we'll just take the conversations further. There are more questions. We will tag you. Please have fun at it and leave us your responses. But yes, this is the first of the webinar, and there are many more to come. So, right, you're in good space here. All righty, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Wait. Okay.